But if they do not, they ought to be asking. I mean, the surprising thing to me is that this administration, this president, doesn't want or doesn't even ask for the ability to reestablish the priorities.
See the rest of this briefing in the C-SPAN video library. The U.S. Senate is about to return for more debate on online sales tax legislation. No votes scheduled in the Senate today. And now live to the Senate floor.
To proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I rise today in support of the Marketplace Fairness Act. I'm pleased to join Senator Enzi in Durbin and many of my colleagues in this bipartisan effort to pass this bill that will help small businesses in my state expand and create jobs by ending a tax loophole that benefits out-of-state remote sellers. And I want to particularly commend Senator Enzi and Senator Durbin for their long-time leadership on this issue. They've been relentless in trying to find an effective way to allow states to collect sales taxes on items that are actually delivered into their states. This is a huge issue in my state of Rhode Island, where businesses are having a very difficult time competing against out-of-state retailers because of, frankly, the outdated rules that require shops on Main Street to collect taxes, while their out-of-state online competition doesn't. And when you go to any of the stores in Rhode Island, they are facing this with increasing frequency, and small businessmen and women are demanding help in this regard. When Internet commerce went in its early stages, online companies were basically exempted by what is now, by all accounts, an out-of-date Supreme Court decision from collecting state and local sales taxes for sales to states where they do not have a physical presence, despite the fact that there was still an obligation to collect sales taxes on those purchases. That obligation was just shifted to consumers who often aren't aware of their obligation. This loophole puts Main Street businesses at a competitive disadvantage, hurts the ability of Rhode Island to keep jobs in the state, and has strained state budgets all across the United States. In order to address this inequity, the bill before us today would give states the ability to enforce their own sales tax laws and, by so doing, relieve consumers of the legal burden to report to state tax departments the sales taxes they owe on online purchases, since they would be paying sales tax as a matter of course at the time of purchase, just as they do at a physical store. Essentially, it levels the playing field. If you walk into a local store in Rhode Island, there's a sales tax charge, you would pay it. If you have delivery at your home of an item from the Internet, you would pay the sales tax as part of the bundled price of that item. It is what people, I think, expect to do, and certainly it would be hugely beneficial to my small businessmen and women and to my state. It also would ensure within the legislation that the rules for collecting sales taxes from out-of-state retailers are clear and consistent. States can enter into an already established streamlined sales and use tax agreement, of which my state and 21 other states are party to. Or states can adopt a set of alternative minimum simplification standards to make it easier for online businesses to comply with their tax laws. And this bill makes it easier for businesses that choose to do business in a state that requires remote sellers to collect sales taxes to comply with the law by providing software to help them calculate the sales tax. Furthermore, this bill exempts small businesses with less than $1 million in gross revenue from having to collect sales taxes on remote sales. Those truly small home businesses would not be affected by the legislation before us today. This bill does not create new taxes or increase existing taxes. Instead, the bill will help states and cities collect billions in unpaid taxes already owed, reducing the need to raise new taxes on tax-compliant businesses and citizens. Indeed, yesterday I was with my governor, and he indicated that if we could pass this at the federal level and allow the state of Rhode Island to collect approximately $70 million a year, he would propose a reduction in our sales tax, which would benefit all the people in Rhode Island and also benefit the businesses in Rhode Island because they would have a smaller sales tax margin to pay. So this is a proposal that I think is not only necessary, it's long overdue. In 2012, as I've indicated, Rhode Island estimated it lost approximately $70 million in uncollected revenue. The revenue was legally owed, but because of this loophole, it went uncollected. This puts pressure on individuals and businesses that play by the rules. Indeed, if the Marketplace Fairness Act becomes law, Rhode Island has provisions in state law, and the governor has reiterated that yesterday, that would help lower the sales tax from 7% to 6.5% and eliminate the recent extension of sales tax to clothing purchases over $250. These would have huge and immediate benefits to the people of Rhode Island and to the businesses of Rhode Island. And the other thing it would do, frankly, it would give incentives for local businesses to hire Rhode Islanders. We are in the midst of a 9% unemployment rate. We have been slowly making progress, but painfully and too slowly making progress in terms of putting people back to work. And one of the disincentives is the competition by remote sellers to the local stores that actually will hire Rhode Islanders. Some online retailers that benefit from this unfair tax advantage understood the need to correct the loophole. That's why companies like Amazon.com with substantial remote sales support this legislation. And governors of every political stripe recognize their undue pressure this tax loophole puts on their budgets, citizens, and businesses, and that's why the National Governors Association supports this. Ultimately, the Marketplace Fairness Act is about revitalizing our real economy by helping Main Street businesses compete against remote sellers that benefit from this tax loophole. Because these businesses can't hire workers or expand if shoppers use their stores just to browse and then to make their purchases online where they don't pay sales taxes. Yesterday, we were with a group of business leaders in Rhode Island, among them the Carty brothers, Ron and Pete Carty, who have run a family furniture store. It's been in the family for generations. They are first-rate businessmen, and they are first-rate community leaders. And they would tell me it is not uncommon for someone to come in the showroom, get help from one of their skilled sales personnel, indeed, in fact, order the furniture, have it shipped to their home so they see it fits exactly right, then call up and have it taken back because it can be returned. And then a truck will show up a day or two later with a remote seller with the same item that's already been tested, advised, consulted, etc. We can't have our retailers in states like Rhode Island simply be showrooms for remote sellers. And that is one of the consequences of this loophole that we have to correct. This bipartisan proposal is designed not only to allow states to keep or retain the tax that is owed, but also in the case of Rhode Island to allow a tax reduction, but furthermore to give more incentives to hire local people. This is a legislation that makes extraordinary sense in every dimension. I hope we can get through this debate this week, successfully pass this legislation. We were all encouraged by the 75 votes this amendment received when it was made as a proposal in the budget debate, and I hope we can enjoy that same support as we move forward. And once again, let me thank Senator Enzi and Durbin for their extraordinary leadership. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Senator from Hawaii.
I join my colleague, Senator Reid of Rhode Island, and I thank Senators Enzi and Durbin for their hard work on S743. Madam President, I rise to speak in favor of the Marketplace Fairness Act. This legislation will put businesses in Hawaii on an even playing field with their out-of-state competitors. It does this by giving the states, not the federal government, the states the authority to require out-of-state merchants to collect the same taxes that local merchants have to collect when they sell goods to customers in Hawaii. This is only fair. And I want to be clear about what this bill does and what it does not do, because there is some confusion about what this bill does and doesn't do. For example, this bill does not impose a new federal sales tax. This bill does not require the states to do anything. In fact, if this bill becomes law, nothing would change unless a state passes its own legislation. What this bill does do is to give states that choice. It lets each state choose whether or not to level the playing field for its local businesses. In addition, this legislation provides a framework that ensures that states can exercise this authority in a way that ensures fairness for businesses of all sizes. For example, it requires any state that chooses to exercise this new authority to streamline its sales and use taxes and to provide free software to calculate these taxes to out-of-state sellers. So this does not impose any kind of a burden on these out-of-state sellers who are selling items to people in states like Hawaii. And this legislation protects small online businesses by exempting any business with less than $1 million of annual sales. The growth of the Internet has been one of the most significant drivers of innovation in our country's history. More and more Americans rely on the Internet to run their small businesses, access educational and health resources, keep in touch with loved ones, and for entertainment. Expanding fast, affordable, and secure Internet access is an essential building block for a strong 21st century economy. However, we must be careful to ensure that while we're promoting the economic potential of the Internet, we're also being fair to local businesses and entrepreneurs. These are the businesses that populate the main streets of towns across the country, across all the islands in the Hawaiian chain. These are hardware stores, clothing stores, gift shops, and many, many others, many of which are small businesses. And these are businesses that create jobs, pay taxes, and provide needed goods and services in our communities. In fact, in Hawaii, retail businesses employ nearly 25% of the workforce, about 128,000 people. In 2012, these businesses in Hawaii generated $30 billion in sales, as well as $1.2 billion in tax revenue. Many of these entrepreneurs don't just want to contribute economically. They want to contribute and do contribute to the culture and character of their communities. For example, my office received a call from the owner of Kona Stories, a small bookstore in Kailua, Kona, Hawaii. Kona Stories opened in 2006 and sells over 10,000 titles of all kinds. But Kona Stories doesn't just sell books. It also hosts book clubs, supports local authors and artists, and it also helps promote other local businesses. The programs and meetings that Kona Stories hosts focus on promoting the local culture and character of the community. Small shops like these are places that can teach visitors about the unique characteristics of our communities. They also help bring local people closer together around shared experiences and values. Unfortunately, these small businesses are the ones that are hurt most by the advantage that online merchants currently have because they don't collect Hawaii sales and use taxes. This makes online products appear cheaper because their prices don't include state taxes, even though these taxes are technically still owed. That's not real competition. It's an artificial discount that's unfair to local brick-and-mortar businesses. And it puts businesses in Hawaii, like Kona Stories, at a disadvantage. As a small business, they have a hard enough time competing with the online giants that can offer lower prices, even if they were collecting state taxes. In addition to allowing states to level the playing field for their local businesses, this bill would also provide a boost for state and local governments by letting them collect the taxes that are already owed. According to a 2012 Hawaii Tax Review Commission report, fixing this situation and giving states like Hawaii that option to enact necessary legislation, this would mean nearly $160 million in additional revenue for the state of Hawaii in 2013. I want to be clear, that money does not come from new taxes. It comes from taxes that are already owed, that are just not paid. That's money that should be going to keep teachers in the classrooms, firefighters and cops on the beat, and fixing our roads and bridges so that we all benefit. Overall, the Marketplace Fairness Act is a good bill whose time has come. It balances the need to preserve a vibrant and innovative online marketplace with the need to ensure fairness for local businesses. It also ensures that everyone is meeting their responsibilities with regard to paying state and local taxes. That is why this legislation has such a broad range of support from business, government, labor organizations, big and small, from all across the country. In fact, my home state of Hawaii has been working to try and address this issue on the state level for years. They need this federal legislation. Passage of this bill will finally give Hawaii the ability to address this disparity and put our businesses on an even playing field. That will be especially important to the 2,000 local businesses that make up the retail merchants of Hawaii. Mr. President, Madam President, I ask that a list of Hawaii and national supporters be included in the record for this bill.
Without objection.
I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting this important legislation. I yield the floor. Madam President, I note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
From Nagesh, technology reporter for CQ Roll Call, joins us from Capitol Hill. What's the purpose of this Senate Internet Sales Tax bill?
Well, this legislation would allow states to require that online retailers charge sales taxes, collect and remit them when consumers make a purchase online. That includes retailers not within their own state.
Who are some of the bill's supporters, and why did some of them say that it will level the playing field for retailers?
Well, the bill supporters, which include the retail industry, that's the big retailers, Walmart, Best Buy, Amazon.com, which is an online retailer also, they say that brick and mortar retailers currently are at a disadvantage because they have to charge the sales tax, whereas online retailers don't. Consumers technically are supposed to pay these taxes on their tax return, but studies show that most don't. So in effect, online goods get that 6 to 10% on average discount versus physical goods.
What about the opponents of the bill, particularly in the Senate? Who are we going to hear from, and what are their arguments against the bill?
Well, the strongest opposition is really coming from those states where they don't currently charge a sales tax, because they contend that their retailers would have to it would be a burden on them to calculate the sales tax for these various localities and states and then add it, especially since the state they're set up in does not charge a sales tax. And those include Montana, Oregon, New Hampshire, and these senators have promised to use up all of the cloture debate time. They're also perhaps going to try some procedural attempts to derail the debate, maybe offering revenue amendments, that sort of thing. They're doing everything they can to set this bill back. They say that it wasn't brought through the regular order. It did bypass the Finance Committee. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid brought it directly to the floor. So that is one of their points of contention. But largely they oppose this bill, and they have opposed the collection of online sales taxes.
Let's go back to the big retailers, both the big box stores, the Best Buys, places like that, and the online retailers, Amazon, eBay. Are they all in lockstep in support of the bill?
I wouldn't say lockstep, but the retail industry as a whole, yes. They very much support this bill. They see this as a lifeline. People have heard of things like showrooming. Anyone can tell you that bookstores, for example, electronic goods stores have done very poorly over the last decade. We've seen some major national chains either consolidate or fold completely because consumers are not stupid. They realize that goods are cheaper online. Part of that is because of the sales tax. There are other reasons, but largely we have seen this trend of consumers sort of looking at goods in the store, maybe window shopping, and then going online and buying those goods. That is damaging to both the stores and to the states and localities that collect sales tax and rely on them to provide services. So there is merit to that argument.
What are some of the key amendments that are coming up that you're looking out for?
Well, we've seen a few budget amendments. We're not certain exactly what amendments are going to be allowed, so I think it's a little bit early to say. I do know that we're going to see the senators who oppose the bill attempt to either filibuster or put up some sort of hold. A revenue amendment could potentially derail debate. It's a bit complex exactly why, but it would potentially force the bill to be discharged. So there are various procedures that they can attempt. How Senator Reid structures the debate is going to be crucial.
Well, going forward from here, what are the prospects in the Senate? Is there a companion bill in the House, and has the White House weighed in yet?
The prospects in the Senate do look good. We saw cloture received. There were only 20 votes against it, 70 plus in favor, so cloture passed quite easily. We saw a non-binding vote along similar lines on the Senate budget resolution passed, similarly with 3/4 of the chamber's support. So supporters expect this to get through the Senate. I think it's a pretty safe bet that it will do so, probably this week if the opposition doesn't successfully stymie it. The House is another matter. House leadership is very resistant to anything that's perceived as a tax increase. The Heritage Foundation has said that this is a tax increase and it oversteps federal bounds. They're a prominent conservative group. What they say matters. We've seen other anti-tax advocates also weigh in against the bill. So the House has concerns. However, the retail industry has a lot of clout. We see Amazon.com, when they switched from opposing this to supporting it last year, that made a huge dent in the opposition. And I think it's fair to say that this is something that will likely take place, if not this year, then next year. So the House negotiations are ongoing. The sponsor is Stephen Womack. He has said that he's negotiating with House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte to address his concerns. Nothing has come out of that yet, but we will see what happens.
Gautam Nagesh, technology reporter for CQ Roll Call, with an update on the Internet sales tax bill. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Mr. President, on another matter, this week the Senate is debating a bill that would authorize states to require retailers to collect taxes on remote sales. I recognize that there are a range of views on this bill, and these views don't break along partisan lines, nor do they really fall along traditional ideological lines. Speaking for myself, however, I intend to oppose the bill, and here's why. For me, the issue boils down to the fact that the legislation we're considering would create an enormous compliance burden for a lot of small businesses out there, making them tax collectors for thousands of faraway jurisdictions. Just as importantly, this legislation would increase the tax burden on Kentuckians. As I've said before, I don't think the people of Kentucky sent me here to help them pay higher taxes. Brick-and-mortar companies complain about the inequity that exists in current law, where their customers have to pay taxes that online shoppers do not. And frankly, that's a legitimate concern. But by imposing this new Internet tax, states would suddenly be empowered to force online retailers to simultaneously comply with all the different tax codes of all the states in which their customers reside, and that is no small feat. From what I'm told, there are nearly 10,000 state, local, and municipal tax codes nationwide. And while complying with so many codes might not be a big deal for large online retailers, it's actually a huge burden for the little guys. So small business owners are worried, and justifiably so. I know they are in Kentucky because so many keep writing to share their concerns with me. One small business owner lamented owners had been silenced and pushed to the side in this debate as larger companies press for the changes to take effect as quickly as possible. The simple matter of the fact, he said, is that any business with fewer than 100 employees would be completely overwhelmed by applying, keeping, updating, and reporting sales tax for every state and tax zone in the United States. Pretty hard to argue with that. Moreover, this is a bill that, once again, as happens all too often in the Senate, hasn't been run through committee, hasn't been properly vetted, and hasn't yet had the kinks worked out of it. It's not like there aren't other things that can be done to improve tax compliance from online shoppers, things that don't require us to turn private businesses into tax collectors for remote state governments. Most states already impose a use tax, for instance, which requires taxpayers to report how much they purchased on the Internet. Individual states that are concerned about this issue could choose to enforce their own existing use taxes rather than expect the federal government to impose sweeping legislation to empower states to reach across borders to collect taxes. And let's not forget the fact that the Internet has been such an enormous source of innovation and convenience for our constituents, our country, and our economy, even in these tough economic times. But that's largely because the government has kept its nose out and allowed innovation to flourish. So I won't be supporting this bill. If states decide they need this revenue, they should keep in mind the tremendous burden they'll be placing on the little guys who do so much to drive this economy. In my view, the federal government should be looking for ways to help, not hurt, these folks. Let's be honest, the big guys can take care of themselves. Let's not make it even harder for the smaller competitors. I yield the floor.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell from earlier today talking about the legislation the Senate's been debating, this bill allowing states to collect sales taxes from online retailers that are located outside the state's borders. Right now, there is no sales tax if the online retailer does not have a physical presence within the buyer's state. By the way, we do have a Facebook question on the Internet sales tax. Internet sales tax, support or oppose, and why? Go to go to facebook.com/cspan to make your comments. While the Senate remains in a quorum call, Senators Jerry Moran of Kansas and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut held a news conference this morning, responding to reports of delays at the nation's airports yesterday as furloughs for air traffic controllers got underway.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining Senator Blumenthal and I on a topic that we have been engaged in now, it seems like, for a very long time. As you may recall, we made an effort in the continuing resolution to make certain that the issue of air traffic control towers was addressed. The administration had announced the closing of more than 140 towers. I believe that that's contrary to public safety, and I certainly believe it's unnecessary for the administration to take the position that they are taking. And in fact, the amendment that I offered, that we offered, was designed to give them.
Mr. President, occasionally some of my friends on the other side of the aisle will say that President Obama is being poorly treated on his nominations. Now, that didn't ring true to me, because it seemed to me that just the reverse was true. I've spent a good deal of time in the last two Congresses working actually to make it easier for presidents, not just President Obama, but any president, to have his or her nominations considered in a timely fashion. There are about 1,000 nominations that a president makes in the whole government that are subjected to advise and consent. This is the constitutional authority of the United States Senate. It's put there deliberately by the founders to provide a check and balance. Founders didn't want a king. They had been accustomed to tyranny, and they wanted to think of ways to avoid that. So we said that they created a president, not a king, and said the president shall, with these important nominations, send them up to the Senate, and the Senate has the right to advise and consent. Movies and books have been written about this. It's well known. And some of the most celebrated debates that we've had in the United States Senate have been about presidential nominations. But for the most part, the Senate listens to the president's nomination, extends to him the courtesy that he was, after all, elected by the American people, that he has a right to staff his government, and he has the benefit of the doubt on his nominations for judges. So I was surprised to keep hearing from some of my Democratic friends, every time we confirmed a judge, somebody will come on the floor and say, well, the Republicans are holding up President Obama's nominations. I didn't think that was true, so I asked my staff to work with the Congressional Research Service, and I come to the floor today to include in the record the facts which show that it's not true. Here's the bottom line. The Senate has confirmed President Obama's nominations for Cabinet and Circuit Court, but not his district court nominations, more rapidly than it did those of President George W. Bush or President Clinton. In 2013, the Senate changed its rules to speed up consideration of those district judge nominations. In the history of the Senate, of course this includes President Obama, no cabinet member, unless you count John Bolton's nomination by George W. Bush to be the UN ambassador, and no district judge has ever been denied his or her seat because of a filibuster, that is, a failed cloture vote. And in the history of the Senate, only 7 circuit judges nominated have been denied their seats by a filibuster. 5 George W. Bush's nominees and 2 of President Obama's nominees. So I ask consent to put in the record this summary of President Obama's nominations, along with an article from the Washington Post that points out that President Obama's nominees have been confirmed more rapidly than those of the last 3 presidents in his first term. I ask consent to put that in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, to be more specific about these matters, let's take circuit court judicial confirmations in President Obama's first term. According to our research, the average time for President Obama's nominees was 240 days. That's faster than President George W. Bush, 277 days from nomination to confirmation. So circuit court judicial confirmations, which are usually the subject of great interest around here, President Obama treated better than President George W. Bush, slightly better. First-term district court nominees. The Obama average time, 221 days, is slower than George W. Bush, 156 days from nomination to certification, to confirmation. That's why in January of 2013 we changed the Senate rules to speed this up. And apparently that is working. Last time I checked, during this year, the beginning of President Obama's second term, he has to date had 13 judges confirmed. President Bush, in the same period of time in his second term, had 1 judge confirmed. Second-term cabinet confirmations. The average time of President Obama's nominees is 46 days. That's faster than George W. Bush, 55 days, and faster than Bill Clinton, 68 days from announcement to confirmation. I mentioned the Washington Post article, which said it was published March 18, 2013, and it says, President Obama has announced 8 nominees and still has 4 more cabinet or cabinet-ranked jobs to fill. By contrast, George W. Bush had made 11 nominations by this time in his second term, 9 of which he made in the 6 weeks after re-election. Bill Clinton had announced 12 nominees by the end of December after his re-election. In other words, President Obama is a little slower in his second-term nominees in making those nominations. According to the Congressional Research Service, says the Washington Post, it took an average of 54 days for Bush's second-term nominees. That figure was 67 days for Clinton's picks and 56 days for Ronald Reagan. So the Obama nominees were moving more rapidly. Senate filibusters that denied a cabinet nominee his or her seat due to a failed cloture vote. It's never happened in Senate history, so far as we can find, with the exception of President George W. Bush's nomination of John Bolton. Now, there have been occasions when the minority says, we're not really ready to cut off debate yet. We've got more information we want about a cabinet member. That happened with Secretary Hagel. Many of us made it clear to the majority leader that his motion to cut off debate on Secretary Hagel's nomination was premature because it had only come to the floor 2 more days, and that if we had another 10 days to consider it, that was till after the recess, that there would be an up or down vote. But so far as we're able to tell, there's always been an up or down vote on any president's nominee for the cabinet after that cabinet member has gotten to the floor. Now, it may be that in the past, some cabinets fell by the wayside in committee. I've repeated here on the floor my own experience in 1991, I guess, when President Bush nominated me to be Education Secretary and Senator Metzenbaum put a hold on my nomination that lasted 2 months. But I was eventually confirmed unanimously. So there may have been secret holds in the past that slowed down nominations or even may have killed one. But so far as Congressional Research Service has found, no cabinet member by President Obama or any president has been denied his or her seat ultimately by a failed cloture vote. Same with district judges. No district judge in the history of the Senate has been denied his or her seat by a failed cloture vote. Now, there might have been a cloture vote in 1 or 2 occasions, but in the end, that person was finally seated. And then as far as circuit judges, one of my great disappointments in the United States Senate is when I arrived in 2003, and the Democrats had cooked up a plan to filibuster President Bush's circuit court federal nominees. So far as I can tell, that had never been done before. There's always an up or down vote. Even in the case of Clarence Thomas, for example, a controversial nominee for the Supreme Court, I think the vote was 53 to 47 or 52 to 48. There was no thought of killing Clarence Thomas' nomination by a cloture vote, by a 60-vote margin. So what happened was, without dwelling on it too much, Democrats decided they didn't like some of President Bush's nominees. They weren't qualified. Miguel Estrada was one of the most eminently qualified persons ever nominated. Bill Pryor was another one from Alabama, a former law clerk to Judge Wisdom, for whom I used to clerk. Pickering of Mississippi was another. And they were basically smeared, is what happened here. And it was an outrageous thing. And I remember I was waiting to make my maiden speech as a senator in 2003 on another subject, and I got so upset about this that the first time I spoke on the Senate floor was against that practice of denying the president an up or down vote on his circuit judge nominee. If you don't like the person, vote against him or her, but at least allow an up or down vote. Well, that so enraged the other Republicans that they wanted to change the rules in the Senate. They said, okay, we've got the majority, there are 55 of us, we'll just change the rules and we'll confirm all of President Bush's judges with 51 votes. That's just what the Democrats have tried to do at the beginning of the last two Congresses. We've got enough votes to do it, we'll just change the rules and everything will be 51. Well, cooler heads prevailed. I made a couple of speeches about it. Democrats and Republicans got together, one of these gangs that we have, maybe 14 members, and they said, look, except in extraordinary cases, in the case of circuit judges, there will always be an up or down vote on a president's nominee. But a lot of the damage had been done. And 5 of President George W. Bush's federal circuit judge nominees were denied their seat because of a filibuster. So far as we can tell with the research of the Congressional Research Service, that was the first time in the history of the Senate that had happened. And as you might expect, now Republicans have done the same thing twice. In the case of Ms. Halligan, if you count her twice, that's 3. But you could count Miguel Estrada several times because he was filibustered a half dozen times. So the record is the Democrats have now blocked 5 of President Bush's Republican nominees for circuit judge, and Republicans have blocked 2 of President Obama's nominees. I don't think that's good for the Senate or for the country. I think it would be better if we had up or down votes for cabinet members and for federal judges, both cabinet and district. But the Senate is a body of precedent, and so my own personal view now is that as far as district judges go, I'll always vote for an up or down vote. As far as circuit judges go, I'll always do it except in an extraordinary case. And I've always thought that a president ought to be able to have an up or down vote on a cabinet member. Although, again, the Democrats under President Bush decided once not to do that. So I thought it was important to bring this to the Senate. I'd like for us to not go any further in the direction that we've gone over the last 20 years. I'd like for us to get back in the Senate where we recognize that elections have consequences, that a president needs to staff his government, give the president the presumption of the doubt on judicial nominees, and if we don't like the judge, vote no. That means that Republicans right now have to swallow a little hard because there's a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate. But it won't always be that way. We may have a Republican president and a Democratic Senate. And the Democratic Senate could decide never to confirm a cabinet member or never to confirm a circuit judge. I think the American people would be very upset with that. But I thought it was important to bring this to the attention of the full Senate and to place this in the record. One other thing, I think it's important to know that we've had very good conversations at the beginning of the last 2 Congresses about the rules of the Senate. The rules of the Senate are not as exciting as a debate about guns or as a debate about immigration or as a debate about marketplace fairness, which is the 10th Amendment, really, that we're having today. But they're very fundamental to our country's structure. The wisdom of our founders was that they set up 3 competing, strong branches of government, and they all have to function well in order for us to have our liberty. That's why we have checks and balances. We want our liberty. We don't want a king. We don't want a runaway parliament. We don't want a runaway court. We want checks and balances so that we and individuals can retain our liberty. So I want the Senate to function as as it should. And I want the advice and consent nomination to function as it should. That's why, as part of our rules change, we took some step to streamline the advice and consent role of the Senate. We did this when it wasn't clear whether there'd be a President Obama or President Romney, which is one way we were able to do it with a Democratic Senate and a Republican House. But we took some important steps. For example, we reduced the number of presidential nominees that require a full-blown Senate confirmation by about 170. We took another 200 or so of those nominees, and those go right to the desk. They're expedited. And unless an individual senator says, I'd like to have a full hearing on a member of the board for the Goldwater Scholarship Fund or something like that, then that stays on the desk. Everything goes through the committee, all the vetting, and then it can move to the calendar for a vote. That's worked pretty well. We did one other thing that was important, and I hope that the President and his administration are taking advantage of this. We tried to work on the innocent until nominated syndrome that's existed around here for a long time. That is that whenever you're nominated for a cabinet position, that you have to go through such a process of vetting and public scrutiny and general indignation that you'd wonder why anybody in his or her right mind would do it. And lots of people won't. That's why we call it innocent until nominated. And one reason for that is because of the multiplicity of forms that a nominee for, say, Secretary of Education has to fill out. You might have to fill out on this form over here what your income was in 1977, and you might have to fill it out over here what the income was in 1977 by a different definition. And then when you get to your hearing and you've made a mistake, some senator accuses you of perjury because you're sworn in and said you're going to tell the truth. So it was easy to make a mistake under those circumstances. So what we did was create a working group of outside the government that reviewed all those forms and made recommendations mainly to the executive branch about simplifying them. And the executive branch has worked with our Senate committees, and they're doing that now, so that if I'm nominated for Secretary of Education, I might fill out a single form, and that form might comprise the only form I'd have to fill out for the executive branch, and any Senate committee, of course, could ask any question it wants and add that to the form, but they might agree to start with that form. In other words, it'd make it simpler for the nominee, easier for the senators as we go through the confirmation process, and it might be a way to help encourage talented men and women to go into public service. I mean, the President, I don't think, would mind. He said to several of us before that he recognizes that part of the reason that his nominations aren't moving as rapidly as he'd like for them to is because of the vetting process, the process that he and his administration have to go through before they even send anybody over to the Senate. A lot of the delay is in the time that comes before a nomination actually gets here. So I hope this review will help to quiet down these, as Senator Grassley said, crocodile tears on the other side of the aisle that we don't think are deserved. I mean, if the President's cabinet nominees are moving more rapidly than the last three presidents and his circuit court nominees moved more rapidly than George W. Bush's, and if we've changed the rules to speed up his district court nominees, and if it's ahead 13-1 in terms of nominations in the second term for judges, that's a pretty good record. And I hope the President will work with us, speed up his vetting process, develop this innocent until nominated effort that's going on so that it can be of advantage to not just this President but to future presidents. And hopefully we can give respect and due consideration to any nominee that the President sends, and that the President at the same time will recognize that we have an advise and consent responsibility, and that sometimes it takes some time, and we'll ask questions, and we may not want to move to a final vote At the very moment, the majority leader may. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the nominee is going to be denied his or her seat. In fact, so far as I can find in the history of the Senate, it never has, with the exception of John Bolton. So I thank the President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President,